Hello, here in this video we're going to be looking at week 25 in the homework. So page 1 says factor the quadratics and find the x-intercepts. So this won't just be factoring, but it's also factoring and then using that zero product property to set both pieces up equal to 0. So the page, what makes this page a little bit unique is that a lot of them are just regular factoring where we don't even have a number with our a term, right? So it's just a little bit easier. But also there's one that does have a number with for our a, and then there's several that have negative signs for our x squared. And so that's what we're really going to want to look out for. So I'm going to show us how we can appropriately handle those. Okay? So anytime we see a negative sign out in the front like this, what we're going to want to do is go ahead and remove it using greatest common factor, because we're used to factoring these when our x squared is positive, and we don't really have a lot of experience factoring it when it's negative. And honestly, we don't need to, because here's what we can do. I can factor out a negative sign from all of these. Right, so what you see I've done is I've factored out a negative sign, and it makes everything change signs, right? Because I want this x squared to be positive. So if it was negative and I divide it by negative, that'll come out. And then I have to do it to everybody, right? So this positive turns negative, this negative turns positive. Now what that helps us do is now we're really only having to worry about factoring this piece here. So we're trying to find numbers that multiply together to get us a 63, right? That add to give us a negative 16. All right, so that's what we are looking for here, and that way we can get our answer factored. Now do go ahead and remember that we did factor out a negative sign, so go ahead and do put that out in the front. Right, and so now what we're looking for is just this. Factors of 63 that will get me a negative 16. Now, since this is a positive and this is a negative, I know that I'm going to need to be going double negative here, right? Because it's the only way to still get a positive number, right? Negative times negative gives me positive, but I also need it to be double negative. That way, when I add these numbers together, I can get a negative number. Now, when you look at this, you can generate a list of factors of 63 to help you find it. But what I notice is that if I do a negative 7 times a negative 9, that gets me a positive 63. And also a negative 7 plus a negative 9 gets me my negative 16. All right, so since it's just an x squared, I know I just need an x and an x. One of them is a minus 7. One of them is a plus 9. All right, so now using our zero product property, we're going to take both of these pieces and we're going to set them up equal to 0. We don't have to worry about the negative sign. Right, it's just kind of sitting out there for us. So I'm going to take one of my pieces, x minus 7, set it equal to 0. I'm going to take my other piece, which is an x plus a 9, set it equal to 0, and solve for my two x-intercepts. Now it's just solving a one-step equation. I'll add a 7 to both sides to find one of my solutions. Now this one, we just subtract a 9 from both sides, and we get our other solution. So those are our two x-intercepts. I'd cross when x is a 7 and when x is a negative 9. Remember, the key thing to remember is if we see a negative sign out front, we're going to want to factor it out from everybody. Everybody's going to change signs. So for example, here if we're looking at the one right next to it, I'm just going to show you how to get started. Since our x squared is negative, we're going to pull a negative out from everybody. So everybody is changing signs here. And then you move on and you'd get this factored in a similar process like we did over there. Okay. Don't forget here though, on one like this, there's not a negative sign out front, but whenever we have a number with our x squared, it has us added another column on our table here. So now we're looking for what numbers multiply together to give me a 2, what numbers multiply together to give me a 21, and these have to be in combination with each other to get that 17. All right, and so you know the only factors of 2 is 1 and 2. For 21, there's a couple though, right? Like we've got 1 times the 21, we've got the 3 times the 7. So you're trying to figure out what kind of combination of 1 multiplied by 2 can I put that with either one of these to find our answer here, right? And so on this one, I see that if I do 2 times the 7, that gets me a 14. And then if I do a 1 times the 3, right, that's going to get us our 17 there. All right. So then to get our factoring set up, it look like this. The numbers that go out in front, I know it's going to be an x and an x. One of them is a 1x. One of them is a 2x. Right? And then remember, these arrows are our distributing arrows, right? So like when this x would multiply by this number over here, this 1x has to multiply by a 3, right? This 2x has to multiply by a 7 there. All right, now don't forget, take these, set them both equal to a 0 there. Be sure to finish solving for your answers. All right, so here we have week 25, page 2. It says solve these equations with square roots. Do not forget your plus and minus. All right, so what's going on here is it's a variety of equations. Some of them are just one-step equations where we have to use square roots, and it starts to build this up as we go through the different types. But remember, solving equations is working backwards. So the square root is always the last thing we will do. I'm going to write that on here for us. So using the square root is the last step we do. On some of the easier one-step equations, it's the only thing to do. Right, so if I'm trying to solve this, x squared is equal to a 25. Right, I'm going to rewrite it so I have some more space. If I have x squared is equal to a 25, to get rid of an x squared, I need to take the square root of both sides. Right, taking the square root and having something squared are opposites, so they cancel out, leaving me with my x is equal to a. Now, the square root of 25, and we said don't forget your plus minus, is a positive or a negative 5. Because if you think about plugging this back into our equation, both of these would work, right? Because 5 squared is equal to a 25, and also a negative 5 squared is also equal to a 25. So that's why we need both, the positive and the negative. So we call that plus or minus, right? So as you're moving on to the different types, remember that taking the square root is the last step we do, right? So maybe we're looking at one like 15 down here. It's essentially a two-step equation. So let's subtract 5, subtract a 5. We get a 4x squared is equal to a 36. I can't take the square root of both sides yet. We're going to wait. We're going to do that last. I'm going to divide both sides by 4. And we're going to get that x squared here is equal to a 9. And now we can take that square root. All right, so we'll square root both sides. Since these are opposites, we'll get that x is equal to the square root of 9 is a positive or a negative 3. Remember, always take that square root step last. Always do that square root step last. Okay? All right, so this page here, the page 3, wants us to, here's week 25, page 3. It wants us to find our x-intercepts and our vertex and then use the key points to sketch the graph. All right, so factors. That's how we find our x-intercepts, right? Factors is finding our x-intercepts. And this is just like we did on the other page. So what you're going to want to do is find out what numbers multiply together to give you a 10, that those numbers also add up to give us a 7, and you want to get your answer factored into its two pieces. All right, so once you have it into your two pieces, what you're going to do is you're going to set them both up equal to 0, and you're going to solve for your two x values. All right, so it's just like the first page. Right, so these here, I guess I should have wrote them down here. Your x-intercepts will be found by factoring and solving, right? So you'll factor, just like we did on the first page. You'll set both pieces up equal to 0, and then you'll solve both of your x's. And that'll tell you the two spots here on the x-axis to plot your points. All right? For the vertex, remember that it's a coordinate point. And to get started, we need our formula of negative b divided by 2a. Negative b divided by 2a is what we're going to want to start off with here to find that x-coordinate. Now to find your y-coordinate, we know that we always plug in our x into the original equation. So in this particular case, is an x squared plus 7x plus 10. Our y-coordinate is going to equal whatever our x was squared plus 7, but instead of an x, whatever our x was, and then plus 10. So if you do negative b over 2a to find this value, then you plug that value into both of these spots and evaluate it. It'll tell you what your y-coordinate is. So then we'll have two spots on our x-axis somewhere in here. We'll also have a vertex, and using those 3 points, we'll be able to graph our equation. Right? And that process also continues here for us on the back. All right, so be sure to do that. Remember on this one, make sure to bring that negative out front first. All right, so then on that, you can do your vertex before or after you pull out that negative sign. It'll work out either way for you. All right, so don't be afraid of when am I supposed to pull it out? Will it influence? Do I pull out to the factors only? Do I leave it in there for the vertex? It won't matter because you could think about this as this, or you could think about it as this. So using, as long as you're looking at either equation, so to find your vertex when you're doing that negative b divided by a 2a there, it doesn't matter which equation you use. You can use this one where your b is positive 1 and your a is a negative 1, or you can use this one where your b is a negative 1 and your a is a positive 1. Both ones still going to tell us the same information to get us the x-coordinate of our vertex. All right? So there we go. And we have a little bit of extra time, so I'll go back and I'll finish showing us how to do that first one for us. All right? Here we go. Finding numbers that multiply together to give us a 10, that add to give us a 7. I know it's going to be a 2 and a 5. All right, so what goes out in front? Well, I'm looking for an x squared. So I need an x times x. One of them's with a plus 2. Another one's with a plus 5. I'll set both pieces up equal to a 0. And then solve for my x. So here we'll subtract a 2 on both sides. All right, so one of our x's is going to equal a negative 2. All right, that's what we get here. All right, now on this one, we'll subtract a 5 from both sides. And we'll get that our x is equal here to a negative 5. All right, so on our graph, we see that one of my x-intercepts is at a negative 2. One of our x-intercepts is at a negative 5. All right, so it looks like on this one, and we also know that our vertex is going to be halfway in between our two x-intercepts. So it looks like we are going to have a fractional exponent, a fractional vertex coordinate here. And we'll verify that using our negative b over 2a. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show us the processes of going through this here. So for our equation, I went ahead and I did our negative b over 2a. So I plugged in our negative sign with the 7, the 2 times the invisible 1, right? You can think of there as being a 1 here with our x squared. All right, and when we simplify this, we get a negative 7 over 2. Or for our graph, a negative 3.5 is what we'll be thinking about for that. Now, we haven't covered rules of exponents yet. So I used a calculator here, and this is what we would do up to this point until we learn our rules of exponents to talk about how we can take this exponent to this number and finish simplifying it, all that stuff. But what I did was I just typed it in on the calculator, right? And we'll be learning how to do that. And when it tells me is that our y value is a negative 2.25, right? So now we have our vertex. So I'll go here. I know that negative 3.5 is in between these two. And then I go down to negative 2.5. So there would be our vertex. And then those are going to be the points that we use to draw our parabola. All right. So sorry about the decimals, but there we go. So if you run into any more, be sure to still follow this template, right? Because what I did was I took my negative 3.5 and I plugged it in here. I took my negative 3.5, or if you think about it as the fractions like that, and I plugged it in and got my correct answer.